It's a shocking fall from grace. In less than a year, P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds. Right now, he's behind bars in New York. The same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers, and in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in other celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuit, and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. A groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center. After he was twice denied bail, Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea something was on the way. Just this week, we learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings, showing the disturbing details of these freak-offs, and the feds had a heads up about these recordings. Thanks to some of the civil lawsuits filed against Diddy, namely the one brought by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer, Lil Rod. Lil Rod worked with Diddy on his Love album, starting in 2022, and says he experienced months of abuse, all at the hands of Diddy. In his lengthy civil suit, Lil Rod refers to these recordings, saying, quote, "required Mr. Jones," that's Lil Rod, "to record him constantly." Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff and his guests engaging in some serious legal activity. Lil Rod's lawsuit also lays out some other pretty disturbing claims, like that Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. But Lil Rod's lawsuit came out swinging in more ways than one. Not only did it shed light on the dark allegations against Diddy, but it dropped some high-profile celebrity names, too. First, there's Academy Award-winning actor Cuba Gooding Jr. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. while they were on Mr. Combs's yacht. The lawsuit includes pictures of this too, showing both Diddy with Cuba and then Cuba with his arms around Lil Rod. Court does go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assault, so now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault others back in 20 on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse. After allegedly groping a woman in Times Square, by the next year, 3 women had come forward, accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of
present,
counseling
and no
but no
longer
jail
has a
time.
voice who will
Just
pursue
this summer,
justice for
he
her
appeared on Dan
accusation.
Abrams Live,
As
where
of
he
the taken
discussed
against
those
Diddy,
charges
no
when he
expansion
pleaded
of the
guilty to a
investigation,
forcible touching
no isolation
misdemeanor
orders,
in
no
2022,
equipment access,
eventually
no
led to a
suspension of
guilty
attorney
plea of a lesser
communication,
charge.
as
A
it
year
appeared.
later, you
And if
settled
what
a
it
federal
says is
civil
true,
lawsuit,
then
2 more
punishment.
civil
Part
misconduct
3.
lawsuits.
The
Can you
person no
understand
longer in
why
the
some
system.
would
The
say
internal
don't want to
personnel
cast this
database
guy?
of the Atlanta
Sure,
Federal
but
Detention
I can
Center
also
updated its weekly
understand
roster.
some people who
Under the
come up to me
category
in the
Special
street all the
Personnel Code
time
Adjustment,
and yell, "Show
the
me the
name of
money,"
Warden
and
TD
say,
was
"Hang in
marked
there,"
as
and
removed
I
from
see
system
what
by
you're going
administrative
through.
order.
You know,
There
you
was
make
no decision
movies for
number
an audience
recorded,
of
but
people,
was
right?
deactivated.
So right now,
Her
I'm
personal
making a
contact
movie for
information
faith-based
disappeared from
people
the
who
internal
are
network
excited to
exactly
move our
3rd
hope in
Detention
humanity,
Center.
especially the
No
times we're in,
confirmation
dealing
exists
with
as application
politics
was made.
and the world
The
issues that
removal
are
of
going
Warden
on.
TD's
So
name
that's where
was
I
not
am
accompanied
now,
by
and
any
have you
or
expressed
protective
regret, sorrow,
reassignment.
apologies
At
for what happened
11:20 a.m.,
previously.
a printed
Everything that
copy of the
happens in my
personnel
life is
deployment
for a
chart was
reason. I
generated in
believe that.
preparation
And
for the
if
new
I
week's schedule.
continue to walk on
Under
my
the
path,
section
whatever
marked
that is,
Internal
I
Alert,
know at the
TD's
end
name
result, it'll be to make me stronger, to be a better person, to be a better father, you know, and right now that's the moment I'm in. Back to Melba. She says it's possible that charges could be brought against the actor. I am getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have 2 different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, you know, years apart. I think there's something there, and I don't that Cooper Jr. is going to escape from that one because he already saw definitely people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time. Is possible that he could face charges based on these allegations that were brought forward by Lil Rod. It is possible as well. Again, we've got the statute of limitations issue to deal with. So depending on the time frame of when this happened is, you know, again, the Adult Survivors Act, which was the vehicle where many these lawsuits came out.
Will leave you
when
speechless.
if these
When
civil
the first
law school
images
suits,
from the federal raid on Diddy's $40
came out
million
there,
Los
there
Angeles
was a
estate were
thin out
released, no one
amount of
expected
time for
this.
those suits to
Neatly
be
stacked
filed.
in display
The time
cabinets
frame
like prized
is going
possessions
to be
were
very,
200
very
bottles
important
of baby
on
oil.
what
Right next
witnesses
to them,
come forward.
over 900
because again,
bottles of
you know,
lubricant.
this
Rows and
may
rows.
not be a
It looked
situation
less like a
where
home and more
DNA
like a warehouse for
may be
something
at
far
play.
more
This may be
disturbing.
more of a
These weren't the
situation
kind of items
of, hey,
most people
yes,
keep in
I was
bulk,
there,
but for
and I
investigators,
recall, you
it
know,
painted a chilling picture.
Cuba Jr.
Why would one of the most
you
powerful
know,
men in
putting
hip-hop
his
need
hands
this
on the
much?
L Rod,
And more
or
importantly,
you know,
what exactly
recall
were they
certain
used for?
aspects. So it's going to be a very witness-intensive type of case. And the question is, will witnesses be willing to come forward? Another high-profile name listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Jennifer Lopez, from the standpoint of the names of the celebrities that were tied to this. The fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in a party to a shooting at a nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his quote, "Rico enterprise has existed for at least dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC, when Mr. Combs required his then-girlfriend, Jennifer Lopez, to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court also alleged Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999, at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar. Guns were drawn, and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him. Because of this allegation, experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting. If there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation, what would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago. Well, it would take it, it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now, federal charges can be different. You can have RICO, you can have a continuing criminal enterprise, you can have the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them. When I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up in, when I worked cold cases of this type. Sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who was the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. Certain when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off, or jurors multiple that may have been paid off, certainly that gives you the impetus to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different. So it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case. We also know that federal investigators have spoken to other plaintiffs in civil cases against Diddy to learn more about his personality and what he's like in relationships. That means J-Lo is someone the feds will want to talk to if they haven't already. It also means she could be called to testify against him. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If I was the prosecutor handling that case, I absolutely would list her right. But of course, we need to know whether or not she'd be cooperative. That, of course, changes the strategy when it comes to trial. So you may list someone as a potential witness. That does not mean you're necessarily going to call them. The question is whether or not they're going to. And testimony is really going to help you. But there is a universe where she could testify against him in terms of, violence, in terms of his interactions with other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in, human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little rod in, included
Present,
screenshots of those
and no
videos
longer
in
has a
the
voice who will
pleadings.
pursue
So
justice
how
for
much
her
of that
accusation.
is into when did she know it?
As of the
And what
taken against
actions
Diddy,
did she take
no
at the
expansion
time?
of the
Is that
investigation,
part of the reason
no
why they
isolation
broke up?
orders,
We don't know.
no equipment
So
access,
all of this
no
will just be
suspension of
seen.
attorney
Obviously,
communication.
the
As it
prosecution and
appeared,
law enforcement
and if what it
need
says
to
is
speak with
true,
her,
then
get a
punishment.
statement from her
Part 3.
to understand
The person no
what she
longer in
knows
the
or what
system.
she'd
The
be
internal
able to
personnel
testify
database
to,
of the
and
Atlanta
then
Federal
make
Detention Center
appropriate
updated
decisions
its
from
weekly
there.
roster.
But it's not
Under the
just artists
category
that
Special
Lil Rod
Personnel
named.
Code Adjustment,
Either he
the name of
specifically
Warden
mentioned
TD
Prince
was
Harry,
marked as
the Duke
removed
of
from
Sussex.
system
In
by
text,
administrative
it reads,
order.
in part,
There was no
quote,
decision number
"Mr.
recorded,
Colmus
but was
was known for
deactivated.
throwing
Her
the
personal
best parties,
contact information
affiliation with
disappeared from the
Anvil
internal
sponsorship.
network
Mr.
exactly
Colmus'
3rd
sex
Detention
trafficking
Center.
parties garnered
No
legitimacy
confirmation
and
exists
access
as
to
application was
celebrities,
made.
such as
The removal of
famous
Warden
athletes,
TD's
political
name was not
figures,
accompanied by
artists,
any
musicians,
or
and
protective
international
reassignment.
dignitaries.
At
Like British
11:20
royal Prince
a.m., a
Harry.
printed
Why
copy
even
of the
name
personnel
Prince Harry?
deployment chart
There's
was
no
generated
allegations
in
against him
preparation
or
for the
anything,
new
but
week's
why bring him
schedule.
up? I think
Under
it
the
may have
section
been
marked
removed to bring
Internal
more
Alert,
credibility to the
TD's name
filing and say that, basically Diddy was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself, so he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the EP Scene case, that they were close and that they traveled together. And, there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story.
Will leave you
But Prince
speechless.
Harry
When the
and the
first
way
images
that it
from the
was
federal
mentioned
raid on
seemed to
Diddy's
be
$40
very,
million Los
again,
Angeles
just sort of
estate were
trying
released,
to bring
no one expected
legitimacy
this.
and talk
Neatly
about
stacked
these
in
were the
display
people
cabinets
that
like prized
that
possessions
Diddy
were
surrounded
200 bottles
himself
of
by
baby
to
oil.
protect
Right
himself.
next to them,
Prince
over
Harry
900
has no
bottles of
criminal
lubricant,
charges or
rows and
even
rows.
any
It looked less like a
accusations of
home and
illegal
more like a
activity,
warehouse for
but he
something
could
far
still
more
see the
disturbing.
inside of a
These weren't the
courtroom
kind of
in a
items most
defamation
people keep in
case.
bulk,
It's
but for
possible that
investigators,
Prince
it
Harry
painted a
may
chilling
be able
picture.
to preserve
Why would
his
one of the most
reputation,
powerful men in
and
hip-hop
since
need
it was
this
such
much?
a minuscule
And more
mention
importantly,
in the
what exactly
greater
were they used
context
for?
of this filing, he may be okay. Another celebrity mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Young Miami, who dated Diddy from 20. The lawsuit, Young Miami's cousin, assaulted Lil Rod during the Thanksgiving holiday in 2020. Similar to Prince Harry, there are no allegations against Young Miami herself, so there's probably no worry of charges being filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, who Lil Rod compares to Jill Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years. Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Colmas and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Colmas and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in NYC. Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, staff personal assistants, and other Combs business employees facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra, linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So, according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people. They have someone that does their dirty work, and it's usually not only just one person, it's several people who may have different duties. So again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of, covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward, that's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because of the fact that, Epstein committed suicide and was not able to be held accountable. And we can't talk about Diddy without mentioning Cassie, the one whose lawsuit blew the lid off Diddy's alleged scheme. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November under the New York Survivor Act, meaning any sexual assault survivor could file suit against their accused predator, and the statute of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy. Starting, she was just 19 years old, and at the time he was 37. According to her suit, Diddy was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Cassie savagely. Cassie alleged Diddy forced her to use drugs and would physically beat her, or force her to have sex with prostitutes. Then there's the gun allegation that on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, there was no clear reason why Mr. Colmus required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. This echoes a similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went to different events. So, again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain
and no longer
activities
has a
to
voice
prove
who will
loyalty
pursue
to,
justice for her accusation.
basically put yourself in
As
a
of the
bad
taken against
situation.
Diddy,
Well, he can
no
be the
expansion
one
of
to
the
save you,
investigation,
basically.
no isolation orders,
So, in
no
seeing
equipment
that,
access,
the parallels
no
between
suspension of
J-Lo's
attorney
experience
communication,
and Cassie's
as it
experience.
appeared.
Number
And if
one,
what it says
brings
is true,
more
then
credibility to
punishment.
what Cassie said
Part
in her
3.
pleadings,
The person
but
no
also,
longer in the
again,
system. The
it
internal
causes
personnel
us to look
database
at
of the Atlanta
Jennifer
Federal
Lopez
Detention
and be
Center
like some of
updated
the
its weekly
comments she
roster.
made about
Under
the
the
end of her
category Special
relationship to
Personnel
Diddy
Code
in
Adjustment,
terms of,
the name
well,
of Warden
you know,
TD was
there
marked as
infidelity
removed from system
and,
by
you know,
administrative
she
order.
kind of skirted
There was
the
no
issue a
decision
bit,
number
but when you
recorded.
start to
It
look
was
back at your
deactivated.
comments,
Her
you
personal
start to
contact
think,
information
were you in a
disappeared from the
domestic
internal
violence
network
relationship
exactly
with
3rd
Diddy,
Detention
much
Center.
like how Cass ended up
No
in a domestic
confirmation
violence
exists as
relationship
was
with him.
made.
Cassie
The
kind
removal
broke
of
the
Warden
floodgates,
TD's
so to
name was
speak,
not
when she
accompanied
made her
by
civil
any
suit
or
back in
protective
November.
reassignment.
These crazy allegations,
At 11:20
we'd never
a.m.,
heard
a
anything
printed
like it
copy of the
before,
personnel
and then
deployment
all
chart
of a
was
sudden we
generated
have
in
several more
preparation for the
people
new
coming
week's
forward,
schedule.
and then more
Under the
workers
section
to
marked
2024.
Internal Alert,
So, we
TD's
have
name
multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's lawsuit opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly, and Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this is what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including, most recently, Danity K, one of the members of Danity Kane, stating that he had abused her and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here, the feds took notice, and even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew, obviously, when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious, but they were monitoring this the minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit, and when they read those allegations, I can assure you that investigation started immediately, and then, as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So, for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage, or can they substantiate what occurred to them in other ways? Maybe follow-up text messages, emails. All of these things are aspects that they are able to use to now bring in their case in chief against P. Months ago, we reported that Cassie was working with federal investigators in the case against Diddy. And can't know for sure whether she testified in the grand jury hearing that would ultimately indict Diddy, but it's likely at least some of his accusers did. I do believe that a number of the survivors would have testified. I don't think that they would have brought all of them, because of the fact that, number one, you want to testifying is traumatizing, especially when you're talking about the most awful day, likely of your life, and some very degrading things that happen to you, and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know. So you have to be very cautious in when and how you bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial if this does go to trial, and maybe just
pick one or two that make the point right, and then you can fill it in with more evidence as the trial proceeds, but you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence, so that again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to deliberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, it's still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in such with the huge media frenzy around it. And, so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things I think the assistant U.S. attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that had to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then? At the trial now, the key is that the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so, he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so, if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course they'll be brought to testify. But again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors after his indictment. This week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied. Bond statement from his legal team reads, quote, Shaw, Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of
and
these
no
charges.
longer has a voice
Please
who will
reserve your
pursue
judgment
justice for her
until you have all
accusation.
the facts. These are the
As of the
acts
taken
an
against
innocent
Diddy,
man with nothing
no
to
expansion
hide,
of the
and he looked
investigation,
forward to
no
clearing his
isolation
name
orders,
in court.
no
More
equipment
updates are
access,
sure to come
no
in the case
suspension of attorney
United States
communication,
versus
as it
Shaw,
appeared.
Diddy. So
And if what it
make
says
sure
is
to
true,
subscribe to
then
our YouTube
punishment.
page
Part
so
3.
you don't miss a
The
thing.
person no longer
Reporting
in the
for
system.
Law
The
Crime,
internal
I'm
personnel
Sierra
database of
Gillespie.